Hello, and welcome to Draft Day. It's been a while since we recorded an episode of Draft Day, but we are still alive. And my name is John Fleming. I am one of the hosts of Draft Day. I'm joined by one of the other hosts of Draft Day, Jason Bradshaw. Jason, how are you?
John, we back. We back. Uh,
We are so back.
I'd love to say that, it's like, oh, we were just taking out. Now, a lot of this was just like life circumstances slash holidays slash. We just kind of needed a break, I think.
Yeah, it's just sort of it's like there's no like one grand reason or whatever, but like yeah, obviously it's been like a month and a half since we recorded, so hopefully you can get back into the swing of things a little bit here. And I think that we are going to have a quite the interesting undertaking we have going on here. And I don't know
Yeah,
about you, but I'm excited. I'm excited to see how it goes.
yeah. This is for sure one of our more like. I like this idea, and I'm curious if listeners start to enjoy this idea of like doing this with well, as we get into it, there's different ways we can obviously start to take this.
But I just thought of an analogy for what this is like. So it's ambitious in terms of like the scope of it, in terms of like the size of it, but it's also a pretty simple concept. It's not like we're requiring any sort of like create like the the breadth that is the biggest idea rather than anything too elaborate. Basically, this is like the movie Boyhood, where take a while, maybe a bit of a long-term project, but ultimately, it's a simple story, and the simple story of I don't know, Patricia Arquette and Ethan Hawke or whatever that kid's name was.
Yeah, the kid, like none of the kids turned out to, I think, ever be like big actors. I remember being so like I willed myself to love that movie just because I thought the concept was a really cool idea. I was like, oh, it's so good. And then like I went back and watched it like a few years later. I'm like, it was fine.
I really liked it when I saw it, and I have not seen it since, and that seems to be working out just fine for me. So
Right. I mean, we
I,
are
I do
in
remember the
full
prime.
Oscar season, so
Yeah, I do remember that the primary criticism I heard from people about that movie was that the like main kid wasn't a very good actor. Which I guess if you're bringing a kid under your wing when he's like 8 or whatever, got to sort of take your chances with it.
yeah. But you know, that's definitely a thing where because the kid hasn't really gone on to do a whole lot more acting. I don't think, has he? Nothing big,
I
at
don't think
least.
so.
And yet, Patricia Arquette won an Oscar for acting in that movie. So,
She did, and
not
Ethan Hawke,
saying
I believe,
it.
was nominated for an Oscar, but
Yeah, yeah. I think she was probably the best one in the movie. To be fair,
oh yeah,
that or the random like drunken, abusive husband she had at one point in the movie. Not Ethan Hawke. Ethan Hawke was just a deadbeat and young when
yeah,
they got married and had kids. But
that's true. So we're not doing anything to do with movies in this draft, so I don't
we
really. We
already
may
have a
have gone a
4 hour
little,
podcast about the Oscars. If you want to go back and listen to that draft.
and also a 4 hour podcast about a specific other movie from 2014.
I, I don't know what you could be referring to. I don't know.
It's best to have repressed it. I
I mean,
endorse.
it's not problematic. They're not problematic relationships in that movie either, like there were in Boyhood. So
Not at all. Not at all. Anyway, basketball is a
my
sport.
favorite sport. I love the way they
You like the
dribble
way
up
they,
and down the court.
yeah, you got it there. Perhaps some of the players referenced in that song will come up in this draft, not in this episode, perhaps in future episodes, because this is kind of an ongoing project we've come up with. So very popular, I would say in every sport, but especially in basketball, to have like greatest of all time lists. and people like really care about it more in like I feel like people discuss like what's like a top 10 player in basketball way more often than they do like what's a top 10 player in baseball or football.
I agree.
I would I would say that hockey's maybe the second most conducive to this, but even then you have like goalies versus defensemen versus forwards. There's like a lot of difference. Whereas with basketball, obviously there's a difference between centers and point guards, but a little bit more fluid. It's a little easier to kind of compare different positions and yeah. So here's what we're gonna do. We are gonna basically one after another draft our top guys and create a comprehensive draft day list of the greatest of all time.
The goats.
Drafting in the sense that we're alternating picks, but in reality, this is a kind of a comprehensive, cooperative project.
Yeah, I think and it's to me this is a little bit reminiscent. I don't know if you remember back when like they've done this a few times. I think with like the NBA 75 team and stuff, where like TNT had like a draft of those. You put together a team and you could choose from those 75 players. They had people like it was like back before it was like Steve Kerr before he was coaching, and I think Kevin McHale was one of them. Charles Barkley taking Allen Iverson with the top pick, one of the greatest moments
Yeah,
ever.
and everyone just being mad at him.
It's like what? They just
Yeah. So I will. I don't want to spoil too much, but Allen Iverson is not my pick for the greatest player of all time. I mean, he's on my list eventually, but yeah, not number one.
The insane thing is that like we were at a point where obviously like maybe the conversation for number one, it was still there was much younger LeBron at the time. So like and Michael Jordan went third in that draft. Not to potentially spoil who the top two picks could be.
Michael Jordan went third in his actual draft, so maybe there's a connection there.
I mean, speaking of that draft, if you want to go back and listen to that one, we've also covered that draft on this podcast.
Yeah. My main memories of that draft are discussing how I believe it was Jerome Kersey went to Longwood University. Good times. Jerome Kersey also not my number one pick here, but
Jerome Kersey, not to be confused with Javon Curse.
It's true. He did not go to Longwood. He went to Florida.
Yeah.
Which is much less interesting.
In more ways than one.
Yeah.
But yeah, I
mean,
in keeping
up with tradition, we did play pool to determine who would pick first, even though this is probably the least either of us have ever cared about who went first, because it just kind of doesn't really matter. Though I guess
I believe the discussion went, hey, I don't really care if you go first, but we can play pool if you don't care either. And I believe my response was something along the lines of, I couldn't care less. So
yeah, and like I said, I was not motivated to get the number one pick, but I was motivated to beat you in pool, which I did. So
and the
I will get
table
the number one
as
pick.
the second shooter, I thought I was doing good. I think I left all but like 2 on the table, and came very close
on a
to
roll.
it on the table or on the shot that I missed. And then I get a notification. It's like you lose. I'm like, this is my life.
It's fine. It's going to be okay.
I have survived and gotten over it. Barely.
Well, that's good. I'm happy to hear that. So though I do have the first pick, and I will be drafting. I think that a lot of the discourse around like who's the greatest player of all time, like, can be pretty stupid. Like, I think people, no matter whether I agree with them or not, like, often put forth like kind of really dumb arguments towards like their candidate of choice. Honestly, I think there's 4 guys to me I think that you can make an argument for. I'm not sure that I would necessarily be inclined to make those arguments for everybody, but Ultimately, the guy that crosses the most boxes for me is probably the chalk answer. I'm going with Michael Jordan. Don't think there's going to be a lot of people who are like crushing the pick of Michael Jordan. You can go another route. I'm not going to argue too vehemently, but I think that he is somebody who just the height of his peak is just so high. This guy who won 5 MVP awards, won 6 Finals MVPs. He's not the guy that has the most titles, but I would say is probably the guy that has the most like title portion where like he was like the guy on the team. It's like you'd argue with like people will bring up like the Kobe thing or whatever. Like Kobe Bryant won 5 titles, but the first 3, Shaquille O'Neal was like the go-to guy for those teams. Jordan was the guy and basically was the guy for his entire career, with the Bulls and then obviously to a lesser extent with the Wizards. But 10 times first team All NBA, 10 scoring titles, which is just like completely insane. Um, Honestly, I think the most underrated thing about his kind of case for being the greatest of all time is 9 first team all defenses. He won a
Yeah.
defensive player of the year as a perimeter player, which like is rare enough now, but especially in the 80s, basically like the one non-center who was winning that award. And just from a perspective of who do I think is the guy that like build this guy around, I can build a team around this guy and I know I'm going to be all right. The Bulls basically immediately after they got Jordan, even though it took them a while until they became champions, they immediately went from being a completely nondescript franchise to being a legitimate threat pretty much right away. And even though he didn't come into the league until 1984, probably like the third best player of the 80s, and then obviously commanded the 90s, and had a couple good years in the 2000s, but primarily on the strength of the 80s and 90s, going number one here.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think anybody. The argument between him and let's be honest, spoiler, probably who I'm taking with the next pick. It's I feel like the thing gets brought up times. Oh, he played in this era, and it's just like, I mean, if we were going to do that, then we would just pick who are the best players in the NBA right now as the greatest players of all time.
Yeah. The era
So
argument always drives nuts because you can really do it either way. You can either try to argue, oh, Michael Jordan didn't beat anybody, or you can say the reason it appears Michael Jordan didn't beat anybody is because he was so dominant.
yeah,
Like, are we going to say, like, if you're going to do like the Michael Jordan versus LeBron argument, you could say Michael Jordan never had to compete against, the Steph Curry, Kevin Durant, Golden State Warriors. And that's true. If Michael Jordan had competed against them, though, would that team look as good? I don't know. It's kind of an unanswerable question.
yeah, I think it's and when I look back at some of these guys too, like as we get and we'll go throughout this list, like people talk about the Steph Curry and everything, but like how many people in an era where people did nothing but shoot jump shots, but there was no 3-point line? Like, how different are we looking at some of those people from the 50s or 60s? Like when
Oh yeah, I mean most of the guys who are going to end up being like high end picks from that point in time are going to end up being like big men, and then the sport changes. Like, if like like to go with a guy who like on a long timeline will get drafted, but it's probably not going to get drafted in like the first episode of this. But like Pete Maravich or somebody like that, like probably would have benefited a lot from playing in that kind of different era. And if Steph Curry had played in the 50s, I think he would have done all right for himself. It's not like I think he'd have not been able to handle it, but without a 3-point shot, game changes quite a bit.
well, yeah, it's like, I mean, and well, Pete Maravich, I mean, he still averaged, what was it, 40 points a year in college that 1 year, 40 something points. Like,
Yeah, and
it's,
that's pre 3-pointer in college too. Like even by more so. It wasn't until like
yeah,
the 80s.
right. That's the thing. So it's like, you see that obviously, if you look at it holistically, I know you and I talked, we're obviously looking and going to weight heavily in NBA with these guys, but even Jordan, like has a national championship game-winning shot that doesn't hurt either, you know.
Yeah. Also three-pointers, so like used to how
Exactly.
different of eras we're talking about. Like I was looking at a thing not too long ago with like who was on those like North Carolina teams. Like he had James Worthy, he had Sam Perkins was his teammate. I want to say Brad Doherty came the next year. Um, Dante Exum's dad, whose first name I can't remember, but like they had some guys in there.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, he wasn't hurting for talent playing with him at UNC. And in that era of college, I mean, the top teams usually weren't hurting for high end
I mean,
talent.
he did beat Patrick Ewing in the championship game,
Yeah,
so like
yeah. It wasn't like he beat nobody.
yeah,
It wasn't like Hakeem Olajuwon and Clyde Drexler losing to Doug Wittenberg and Lorenzo Charles.
Sidney Lowe. I think there was somebody. I feel like there was somebody on
They
that
had
team who had
somebody
like
though.
Thurl Bailey, I think, was on that team.
Yeah,
Like
you're right.
guys who like had NBA careers but were not Olajuwon and Drexler.
Yeah, I mean, not it's. But yeah, I think to sit here and just like you said, continue to like rattle off some of the stuff, Jordan. I think you know, not to just mention. I think just from a pure like the superstardom he hit from the sport. Obviously this we're looking at basketball player, but you can't deny the fact of like the marketability he had, things, the shoe
Oh yeah.
deal, Space Jam. I mean, like for kids our age, like Space Jam was our introduction to Michael Jordan for a lot of kids. Like,
Like I actually don't remember when I feel like Michael Jordan's just like kind of one of those people that's so famous that I don't remember ever not knowing who Michael Jordan was. Like
yeah,
whenever Space Jam came out, like I knew who Michael Jordan was
yeah,
already. I
I
was
did.
like 7, but
But you get kids that are a few, or not kids now, adults who are a few years younger than us. Because Space Jam was what 96.
96, yeah.
So, and not to mention how much better are Michael Jordan's numbers if he doesn't retire in the middle of his career and then come back?
Yeah, that's a big part of it. So,
Like,
I mentioned he had 10 first team All NBAs. Presumably, he would have had a couple more if he had played those couple years. And honestly, if he had not retired in '98, probably could have got another one on the back end there. In which
well,
case, there's LeBron's the only player that has more. Well, there's a couple guys with 11, but LeBron's the only guy with more than 11 of the first team All NBAs. I mean, another difference when it comes to Jordan versus LeBron's the obvious example because LeBron started his NBA career 3 years younger than Jordan, and like Jordan probably, if he'd played in the NBA for those first 3 years, wouldn't have been as good as LeBron was those first 3 years, just because LeBron physically was so like mature beyond his years. But he would have contributed something. Like it wouldn't have
sure.
been a zero. But also, would he have worn down quicker? Which hard to say, but like LeBron has like worn down less than basically any athlete ever.
Yeah, I mean, LeBron is to basketball like what Tom Brady was to football. I feel like in terms of just and it's a different time too, though. Like nutrition and taking care of your body and stuff is a lot. I don't want to say it's more. I guess it'd be more accessible. There's way more research into it than there was in 1984 when Jordan was coming. Also,
Yeah, there's definitely
man, I
more
would
of a
have loved to see
science to it.
LeBron play a year at college. Oh, how much
Oh my
fun would that have
god,
been?
yeah. I remember they were very briefly, and this was honestly probably for like a week, just when people were bored of talking about LeBron during his senior year of high school. They were trying to make LeBron going to Syracuse and teaming up with Carmelo Anthony for a year happen, which wouldn't have made any sense. It didn't make any sense even in the moment. It's like, hey, these guys are both going to go making millions of dollars in the NBA. Why would they do this? But would have also been like the most absurd college team of all time.
Yeah, I mean, that's literally like 2/5 of like major starters on multiple Olympic gold medal teams playing on a
Yeah.
college team.
Like it would be a college team where like those guys in like 03, 04 would have been one of the like 10 best duos in the NBA already. Like from the jump.
Hey, let's put them up in a game against like DePaul or something, you know?
Oh god. Imagine them play like Rutgers.
Yeah.
I guess
Oh,
Rutgers this year is kind of as
yeah, but like
two
oh three
like
oh four Rutgers would have
top
been,
5 picks.
and they're still mediocre in a fringe tournament team.
Yeah. Yeah.
SEC baby.
Would you like to
But
pick somebody?
sure. Let's just keep the conversation going. I'll take LeBron here. I mean,
Okay.
like I said,
Figured that was probably going to be the case.
4 titles, 4 Finals MVPs, 4 MVPs, 13 NBA first teams, like you said, 20 All-Star teams, and surprisingly low here was only 5 first-team defensive. Uh,
I feel like
Not
his
saying if
defense
he,
kind of came and went.
yeah, like
Like his peak defense with Miami was awesome, but
yeah,
like with the Lakers, he kind of started to phone it in a little
yeah, I
bit.
mean, in the what I literally just call his chase down block era, where like every other night you were seeing him like get at least one chase down block a night, where you're like, that's it's like he jumped from like 3 feet behind him. He should not have been able to block that shot. But
Yeah,
you talked about Jordan coming in and making the impact, and like that Cleveland team when he went there, he had nothing as an
it
18,
was he
19 year
was
old kid,
rough.
and he still, they missed playoffs his first year, and then things took off. I mean,
Yeah,
it's.
that
I
was
mean, what
a
is there to say? I mean, if you name a statistical category in like NBA history, he's probably top 10. Like I think
yeah. I mean,
he's even
he's
top 10 of like 3-pointers made, which is crazy.
for not being somebody that's like considered a particularly good 3-point shooter for most of his career.
Yeah, and
But he's the
it's not even
leader.
like he didn't have to be like because I mean there was such a stretch there where like LeBron, it's like, hey, we're gonna give you the ball and you just go to the hole, and like he was either gonna score, get fouled, or both. 9 out of 10 times. I mean, you know, like you were talking, just the physical specimen. Like, now when you watch him, it's like, okay, like it's been weird the last few years to like clearly see him as like, okay, like LeBron's not the most talented player on his team. I'll say obviously a healthy Anthony Davis is a better player than LeBron James right now.
Yeah, I would
Um,
agree.
but even to see like this past summer in the Olympics, like in that Serbia game and stuff, when like it was tight, LeBron's like, give me the ball, and they still couldn't stop him. Like he's still got that in him. Like he's still LeBron James.
Yeah, I would venture to say that while I think peak Jordan is better than peak LeBron, I think early LeBron and later LeBron are both better than the Jordan versions of those. And like I said, I think Jordan's Wizards years were like better than people remember, but not even close to like the pure magnitude of LeBron. And the fact that LeBron has 4 Finals MVPs, like that's like objectively correct, obviously. I would argue that he probably shouldn't have won the 2021. It probably should have gone to Anthony Davis. Also, they should give him like a bonus one for like just how impactful he was in 2016. Like that is maybe like the like apex of Finals MVPs. You could give him like bonus credit for the fact that he even made the finals in 2007 because that is that is a roster without LeBron that is genuinely like competing
Lottery pick
for
right there. Like
like a high lottery pick. It's
yeah,
like if LeBron had missed this if LeBron had like missed the season with injury, he's maybe teaming up with Kevin Durant in the next season. Like that's how bad they would have been without him.
Yeah, I mean it's not to throw shade at any of the great players he played with, like I don't know what, like Anderson Varejao or something like that. Um,
Larry Hughes might have been the second best player on that team. It was
St.
rough.
Louis's own.
True. Yeah. One of the
But yeah,
funniest quotes was whenever the Cavs drafted LeBron, they asked Ricky Davis about it. He said something to the effect of, "Yeah, it's gonna be good to get some help in here for us." It's like you have no idea much you're how much you're being replaced here. You are not priority anymore.
it's cute that you think you're on that level, or like even in the
Yeah.
same stratosphere. Um, but I will say something that I alluded to a little bit with Jordan or talked about. Jordan definitely gets the edge in Space Jam movie. LeBron's is
Oh
pretty bad,
yeah.
and by pretty bad I mean
Yes.
I couldn't even finish it.
I finished it, but I was very annoyed by the end of it. And like, I'm not going to try to pretend that the Jordan Space Jam is some like work of art. It's like perfectly watchable, like even as an
But
adult.
it also like I don't know, the Jordan one, like it knew it was a Looney Tune movie, so they surrounded Michael Jordan with obviously the basketball, but then a bunch of like comedians that knew how to play Looney Tune slapstick humor. You don't cast Bill Murray and Wayne Knight, to be
Yeah.
to try to make it something. It's like, nah, like you don't get Danny DeVito to be the voice of the villain.
There is also a Patrick Ewing erectile dysfunction joke in there, which is a thing I definitely did not pick up on until I saw it like in my 30s.
I don't even know what that is. I'm gonna have to.
It's when he's at he's a psychiatrist. You'll I think you'll enjoy it when.
Yeah, I only remember Muggsy at the psychiatrist office, just because I remember laughing at how little he looked on the couch compared to the other guys. But and
Yeah,
big
that's
ups to
fair.
Larry Johnson and Sean Bradley, who don't get enough love for being the other guys in that movie besides
Yeah,
Chuck,
I mean,
Patrick, and Muggsy.
Larry Johnson was at least like an up and comer. Obviously, never really
I
like
mean, Larry
came
Johnson
through.
he had a good NBA career. He was a good
Yeah, he
player.
was like an all star. I mean, Sean
Yeah,
Bradley was clearly we found a tall guy, but
tall, lanky white guy to make a funny looking alien. We got this. No offense to the
pretty
blue alien,
much,
but
yeah. We don't need to shoot hard.
I mean, also,
We
like,
use
let's
like
be honest
Reggie
with
Miller or
ourselves.
somebody.
Yeah, like, can you imagine, like, the dunks and stuff there? And I'm like, I never saw, like, Patrick Ewing, like, taking the ball from the top of the key, driving and doing dunks like that. Like, now he'd get down on the post and do his thing,
Oh
but
sure, like it would
dude,
have been
Chuck,
pretty funny
man.
actually if the Monstars had just been like very conventionally good basketball players, but not doing anything spectacular.
Yeah, just like, I'm gonna say, it's like, I feel like if you were to, like, if I was gonna take, like, the way that, like, especially, like, the three main guys, like, played, it's like, oh, it'd be like peaks of like LeBron, Blake Griffin, like the way he would just like run and slam. College Zion Williamson, maybe. Like, and
I mean, honestly,
then,
pro Zion Williamson whenever he stays healthy.
yeah, that too. But it'd be an interesting thing to do. Like, if you were really gonna like, that would be funny to be like, oh, like Steph Curry's on the Monstars now, and he's just like pulling up from half court every time and making threes, and you're like, crud, we can't defend this. But
I mean, they could have done that in the Space Jam: A New Legacy, and they just never really got around. I mean, they had some other players in there, but they had like
yeah,
Anthony Davis and they had some
yeah.
WNBA players. I can't remember specifically who the other people in it were, but
I can't. I'm trying to think. I even made it like that far, but and shout out the last Space Jam reference here to the random thing when they wouldn't go in the locker room and the player who's speaking for everybody is Vlade Divac. So like just as like the representative of the Lakers is Vlade. So
about that. But yeah, I mean, he was probably gone from the Lakers by the time the movie came out because that'd been around the time he was traded for Kobe.
Yeah, he got traded for a guy I bet you we talk about this episode. Depending on how
No,
far we have
perhaps
to
we
get.
will. Uh, where did you have? Was LeBron your number one guy, or was he number two for you?
I had LeBron at one over Michael, and it was purely because of the longevity. That's where I gave my small edge to having LeBron over Michael.
Gotcha.
If Michael doesn't have the retirement stints, I probably take him because I agree. I think at his peak, at his time, like he was more at an echelon above anybody else on the court. I think the type of player he was made him harder to guard in like the bigger moments at times than maybe LeBron. Because especially early on, LeBron, he didn't have the pull-up mid-range shot that he would develop when he was, you know, super LeBron kind of thing. It was much more
Sure.
put your head down, go to loop, and use your athleticism. Whereas I think, in playoff basketball, it's. I mean, could you argue that LeBron James's most famous play in the playoffs is a block?
I would say so. Yeah.
So I mean,
I'm not sure what else it could be. Does he have like a? I'm not sure if he has like a prominent buzzer
he has
beater
a
that
he
I'm.
has some game-winning threes. I don't know if he has any in the finals, but he has some like buzzer beaters. But
Yeah, because the only buzzer beater I can remember with a LeBron team in finals was Anthony Davis having a buzzer beater.
did Dellavedova have one? Am I being crazy?
I don't remember.
In the 3-1 here? I know he had some
Maybe.
good.
I
I
mean,
know he had some good games, which was kind of weird out of nowhere.
yeah. I mean, Ray Allen had the buzzer beater to tie it in 2013, but
But
it's a little bit different.
neighbor across the hall going crazy at that. Well, I was just like, I was at my peak. Like, I want the super team to fail. Like, I had rooted against Boston when they had their super team, and so I was rooting against
Sure.
Miami. And the guy across the hall was very much a LeBron lover, and I still remember my little apartment that I lived in for like 6 months. But
So I
yeah,
actually, so I actually did not have LeBron as my number two. I had him as my number three. It's not like I'm
yeah,
that far off, but so for the number three pick of our little um GOAT list, I guess you call it, the fella who was a time first team All NBA, MVP 6 times, received MVP votes 17 times. He was formerly the leading scorer in the history of the National Basketball Association. I'm gonna go with Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. The
he was
I
third
do
on my
think,
list.
yeah, I do think it's interesting that it like the whole Jordan LeBron thing just becomes this like dichotomy of like these like wing position player guys, but like you know dominant big men are kind of like the basis of the NBA for most of its history. And
True.
Kareem's like definitely the best center of the '70s. He's probably the best center of the '80s, and a guy who, in addition to having a very distinguished college career, just immediately comes in, takes this not quite an expansion, but only in their like second year of existence, Milwaukee Bucks team, turns them into champions within 2 years. Goes to LA until Magic Johnson comes to town to win a title there, but is just immediately also the best player in the NBA with the Lakers, and just a very interesting guy in general. But a guy that twice led the NBA in scoring, led the league in rebounds once, led the league in blocks 4 times. I believe he's the only player who've led the league in all three of those categories at some point in time. 9-time All Defense. Um, Wait, that's not right. Hold on, sorry. 5-time first team All Defense, and 6-time second team All Defense, and yeah, just a superstar on both ends of the court. Guy averaged 24.6 points per game for his career, 11.2 boards. That's despite the fact that he played like much later into his career than most guys do, and the fact that like I believe LeBron still hasn't passed Kareem in terms of games played, despite the fact that LeBron didn't play 4 years of college, or I guess Kareem technically played 3 years of college, but 4 years post high school. Just played so long and was like still a pretty productive player. Like by the mid to late '80s, it was more Matt's team than Kareem's, but he was still like an extremely viable starting center in his you know mid 40s basically.
Yeah, I mean, it's amazing. He never played college basketball. He looked very similar to a dude named Lou, but um,
So, I mean, obviously Lou Alcindor, yeah, but like, what a weird Lou Alcindor was. Like, I realized that he didn't change his name because it sounded cooler. He changed it because he converted to Islam, but real upgrade in terms of like quality of name. Lou Alcindor is a nerd name.
I mean, the dude wore like the glasses on the court, though. He was kind of like the athletic nerd dude. Like,
He is also just like a very fascinating figure because he's like always been like a very intellectual type guy, but also was a physical player and just kind of tough as it came on the court. Also, just a guy that like very well read and very thoughtful and
I just like he had a weird, not weird, but his body was different from a lot of the guys that you would see play physical. They'd be like big dudes, and he was like lean muscle for being as big as he was. He wasn't a Shaq or I don't know, the way other big guys were. Like he was more of a throwback to kind of that a slightly updated version of like a 50s, 60s big man with his body type, I feel like. I mean, that's why the
yeah, because
skyhook worked. It's
even guys like like Wilt or Bill Russell were a little bit more like traditionally muscular, even if they weren't quite as tall. Like
yeah.
it's almost like he almost had like kind of the. It seems weird to say this about a guy that like his style of play seems like so outdated in the modern context, but almost George Mikan or like one of those guys from like pre Wilt and
Way
Russell.
back. And
But
it's
like a
but that's
guy, like he was a highly skilled player, obviously,
and he taught Uncle Jesse on Full House about finding your sweet spot in shooting a basketball. So
so I
um,
believe you. I don't remember that at all. I figured you'd go with an airplane reference, but
I mean, well, he was what, Roger Murdoch, right? I believe in Airplane.
yes,
Roger. My second favorite person in the cockpit. Sorry, but the fact of seeing, my main man from Mission Impossible, Peter Graves. Yeah, that's his name, right? The guy who played the pilot.
that
I
sounds
believe.
right.
Yeah, something like that. But like somebody who was always a straight man, like everything I'd ever seen him in. Like, yeah. I don't want to go off on a tangent because you know how much I love the movie Airplane, and
Oh
I
yeah.
like it's a debate.
Were you think were you thinking of Robert Stack or were you thinking of somebody else?
No.
I'm now
Robert
looking at the
Stack's the main
cast.
guy. I think it's Peter Graves is his name.
Peter Graves, yeah.
Okay. He was the lead on the Mission Impossible television show from the 60s.
Yes.
I used to watch that. And he was also the voice of the Biography channel, if you remember that. On
I
Biography.
for I forgot about that being a channel, but yes.
I
Wow.
loved watching that as a kid just because I liked learning things about random people and stuff.
I
But
would watch that now. Like if I were just like that would just be like a thing to flip like in the way that like 20 years ago I would just flip to any poker game that was on TV. I would just flip to whatever random biography is going on.
thank you, Chris Moneymaker, for making that a thing. Like
Somehow his real name.
his real name. Do you remember who he defeated heads up in that to win?
Um is it Sam Farha?
It was Sammy Farha. I think Dan Harrington may be at third in that tournament.
He was third or fourth, because then he was also top 4 the next year. Which,
Yeah.
boy, this is a blast from the
Anyway,
past.
we've gone down rabbit holes here. But that's why you tune in to draft day, is to hear our random knowledge. And this is why John and I didn't set a number of things that we wanted to go through tonight in terms of how many picks we wanted to get through. So
I feel like we have to at least get through like the top 10. We have to accomplish something here, but yeah, it could get wild.
Yeah, I mean, and I think at the end of it, it's Kareem's Kareem. Like these top ones, I think it's going to get much more interesting. Like this is one of those weird times where as we get like into like episode 3 and 4 of this, it's going to be like, okay, this is where it gets interesting of who you're picking, and maybe people will think that some of these are interesting. Maybe I'll be controversial with my 4th pick. I don't know. This guy, I think at times seems to be controversial. You may have just mentioned him in talking about Kareem. But you know what? Give me the rings. And so I'll take Bill Russell at 4. Obviously, the 11 championships is no one's ever catching that. Like, in the way modern basketball is, like,
basically everybody who's within spitting distance of him was also on the Celtics of that era.
Isn't like Robert Parrish or Havlicek like second?
I think Sam Jones is second.
Sam Jones, that's right.
Havlicek had a little bit of overlap there, but Parrish was later.
Okay.
I mean, Parrish had a few rings too, but yeah.
But this is a guy who still, I think, is second all time in rebounds. But it's like, people are like, oh, all he has is the titles. He won 5 MVPs. It's not, he didn't do anything. 11 All NBA selections, 12 All Star games. And this is the interesting thing, too, in this era. Like Bill Russell, Olympic gold medal winner in 1956. Not, when he wasn't a professional. So I believe he actually was also awarded the most outstanding person in the tournament. Probably not that big of a surprise, but just for lack of any more, like, guy's a winner and like played a ton of minutes, averaged over 42 minutes a game in his NBA career. Keep in mind with the 11 and the 12 and all that, he played 13 years. So like it was I won 11 titles in 13 years.
And one of the titles was a player coach. And was drafted by the St. Louis Hawks, but probably would like to have had that one back, but
yeah. To me, the kind of funny, insane thing here is like, so in a lot of the years where he won MVP, he was selected as second team All NBA.
Yeah, it's basically he and Wilt just kind of like they would give one first team, they'd give one MVP, and
so it's
go forward from there.
But you look at it, he, like I say, he has 5 MVPs, but he has 2 years where he finished second in the MVP voting, 2 where he finished third, 1 where he finished, and 2 where he finished fourth. And there was only 1 year he didn't get MVP votes, and that was the second to last year of his career, where he was still an all-star in NBA second team. Like, won the rebounding championship 4 times. Surprised it's honestly that low, but Bill and Will
22.5 boards per game for his career. Yeah, pretty good.
Like, if anybody gets a 20 rebound game now, it's like, holy crud, he got a ton of rebounds.
Yeah,
whereas,
and
like, if he got like 18, it's like, boy, you're right, Bill, you didn't have a great game. Like,
I think Russell's a little bit more complicated than the other 3 guys we've drafted, just because I think, like, very clearly the least effective offensive player. Not that he was a zero offensively, but just like his defense is the primary draw for him, and probably the great.
I don't believe blocks were a recognized statistic, right?
I believe that's at least not for most of his career, but yeah, widely accepted to be the greatest defensive player in the history of the NBA, and I can't really argue against it.
Remember Ben Wallace, one of the two.
Yeah, and if you if you think Bill Russell wasn't an efficient offensive player, get some.
You couldn't even
Feel like
put Ben Wallace. Ben Wallace at the free throw line might have been better than Ben Wallace shooting like a 3-pointer. I think.
Russell had a 56% free throw percentage for his career, or as Ben Wallace would call it, Dream World.
What was he like? He was like 30 something percent, wasn't he? Like
Let me
it
check,
was.
I have him on this spreadsheet. Let me see where
Yeah, I
Ben
mean,
Wallace is
don't
at.
get me wrong, like Ben Wallace, he was
41% for his career.
like I like honestly, if you put me like gave me a week to train at a gym and then put me in like an NBA game, I could shoot better than 41% for the free throw line, I feel like.
Yeah, at my like of playing basketball, which is not a high peak, I will grant you. And granted, I was not on an NBA court doing it with 20,000 people watching me, but like more than 4 out of 10. Like,
Yeah. Although
and
I
yet,
was made to feel like an apps after missing a free throw as time expired that would have sent the game to overtime. I then my parents were out of town and I was staying with my coach because I was
oh
friends with his
no.
son. He proceeded to yell at me the entire way home and make me feel like crap and make me cry as like a fifth or sixth grade kid.
Youth sports are
Uh,
so cool.
and then, yeah, let's just say I've never been more proud of my father than that moment when they came to pick me up because his wife called my parents and told them what happened. And my dad, like, lit into this dude in a way I've never seen him do before.
Yeah, that's incredibly bizarre behavior to
He,
yeah.
this man had a lot of other problems with
Gotcha.
multiple substances and libations, we'll say. But
Gotcha.
yeah, I had just scored like 60% of our team's points that night or something, and he proceeded to yell at me for missing one free throw when I was like 10.
Uh
So
Speaking of guys who tended to score 60% of the points for their team but also didn't hit free throws, number 5 on this list, I'm going to go with the guy actually has number 4 on my list, which is Wilt Chamberlain. Yeah,
I
I
just had him
think
reversed.
that. What was that?
I just had him reversed. Like it seems like me and you were like in the same ballpark with a lot of this stuff, but just not.
Yeah. I mean, I had Russell a little bit lower, but I mean, he was number 7, I think, for me, so
Yeah,
not exactly like.
Russell's a
But
guy that I'm way higher on, I think, than most people.
yeah, Chamberlain, in terms of like kind of micro peak in terms of just like couple year stretches, really hard to top averaging more than 50 points a game for a season. It's just like completely unthinkable. Like the fact that he scored 100 points in a game and it's not the most unbreakable record from that season because he averaged 50.4 points per game that year, really absurd. He averaged over 30 for his career, averaged 22.9 rebounds. Uh, like shockingly good at assists too. 4.4 assists per game for a center in that era is like kind of silly.
Well,
But
yeah, yeah, for a guy
I,
who is averaging, as many he averaged 30 points in that era or whatever. So it's like you
yeah,
wouldn't
and he was
think.
a
Can you,
four-time MVP. He had, I believe, it's 11 rebounding titles, and like, the only reason his like numbers like aren't even gaudier in terms of, like rebound titles, in terms of like all defense type stuff, is because he was directly competing against Bill Russell. But like to me, that's almost like if you're comparing like if you're like doing a list of like the greatest goalies in the history of the NHL, the guys who played in like the late '90s into early 2000s, like Patrick Waugh, Marty Brodeur, Dominic Hasek are always the names that come up, and they don't have as many like first team All NHLs as you might want from a guy you're declaring the best ever. But like, you just look at the other stuff and you're like, that was just a good era. They just like
oh yeah,
they happen to run into each other, and I think that I think Bill Russell is a much like warmer and easier to embrace figure than Wilt Chamberlain. He was kind of like considered to be pretty out for himself a lot of the time, but also the guy was averaging 50 plus points a game, so I do kind of get it. It is kind of
Yeah,
funny to me that he kind of has a little bit of a reputation as being like, self-absorbed, not being as much of like a team player. He did win a couple titles. It's not like his
yeah,
teams were bad or anything. But, just in terms of like how much he kind of reinvented the game, in terms of how much like the rules of the sport had to change just to accommodate him. Like his scoring totals are kind of like the equivalent of what Babe Ruth was hitting more home runs than entire other teams for a season. Or it's like eventually I feel like the quality of the league sort of like, caught up to some extent, but like people will refer like Victor Wembanyama today as being an alien. I can't even imagine what people thought whenever Will Chamberlain came out. Like how do you even like comprehend what's going on around you when there's like one guy who's just bigger and stronger and just relentless.
yeah. I mean, he was. I mean, definitely a larger than life figure on and off the court, I guess you could say. Um, but like I think my favorite thing about him is like when he was in college, back when like freshmen didn't play and stuff, and like he led like the Kansas JV team to like beating the varsity team as this like
It
freshman just because he was that good. Like,
Those are always such funny stories to me, especially when it happens at a school like Kansas. It's not like
yeah,
Kansas's varsity team didn't have some good players on it too, and
yeah.
yet
I
it was
mean, and
just
that's
such
something
a
I didn't even
dominant.
like. I didn't even mention like college for Bill Russell. Like the dude,
Oh yeah,
he had.
San
There was one
Francisco.
other player, but he led San Francisco to two NCAA titles. Like, speaking of non-powerhouses in the world of basketball, they're not a bad team this year, honestly. They're starting to build a program out there again. But um,
Are they in the WCC?
yeah,
Okay.
yeah, they might be the third best team in the WCC behind Gonzaga and St. Mary's.
All right,
Okay,
you're up next.
going to me next. Shoot. So this is where I start to get but the next two guys on my list. They're just always joined at the freaking hip, if you know what I mean.
The feeling I know who you're saying here.
It's just which one do I take? Like, because I remember me and you were texting about these two guys, like when we were prepping this list, and it's
Sure.
insane how the same they are,
Yeah,
like in terms of
and
their accolades.
I mean, should we just say who the two you're contemplating
Yeah,
between
it's
are?
Magic and Larry, guys,
Yeah.
and
How liberating it is to have not grown up at the peak of their rivalry and just be like, man, these guys are awesome. You don't have to like be a hater. You don't have to be like, oh, this guy's so much better than this guy. Like, no, they're actually just both really good. I don't know.
like, yeah, it's like I guess I may and who I'm sure I'll get flack from some people. I'll give the ever slight edge to Larry Bird, if nothing else,
Okay.
just for if you've ever heard the people like the old times who played against him, like talk about Larry's trash talking.
Oh yeah.
And like and I don't mean this in like a bad way or anything, but like the fact that like most of them were like dumbfounded that this white guy would trash talk them and then do exactly what he said he would do. Like, I mean, and I think he just kind of like, and didn't he just like walk into Indiana State like and just say like, put me on your team or something, or on his high school team,
So
or
he had originally gone to the University of Indiana, and I guess was just like overwhelmed by Bloomington, which is like amazing to think that like he was overwhelmed by how big Bloomington was, and yet like
hey man,
seemed to do just fine in
big step up
Boston for
for French
15
Lick,
years.
man. You know,
Yeah. But then obviously
Um,
eventually went to Indiana State and forged his rivalry with Magic.
yeah, and it's 3 titles, 2 Finals MVPs, 3 MVPs, 9 NBA All First Team, 12 All Stars, and an Olympic gold medal. Um, one of
And
those like
in the case of both Larry and Magic Johnson, both guys whose careers were, for very different reasons, but were cut short for like medical reasons.
yeah,
In terms of like not quite having the like sustained like, into like your mid 30s kind of career that, say a Michael Jordan or LeBron James had.
exactly. And I think that's while longevity, it's just like you really think what if with both those guys. And like I remember like hearing the stories of like what Larry would have to do like on the dream team just to like be able to play in the games and stuff with his back and all this stuff. And it's like, you know, jack of all trades guy in the sense of like was just really good at a lot of things.
Yeah. I
I
think
mean,
underrated as a defensive player in a historical context too.
I couldn't tell you the number of times growing up that my dad, would talk to me about, watching the national championship game between him and Magic Johnson.
And
Larry Bird
Magic.
actually got me extra credit in a statistics course one time for answering a question about mean versus median and why people didn't understand. Nobody knew that why one year out of nowhere the average earnings for people coming out of the University of Indiana was lower than people from Indiana State, and I was the only person that knew. Oh, it's because Larry Bird came out and probably signed a huge contract, and
Yeah,
I got bonus.
probably.
I got bonus points in my statistics class for knowing that at 7:30 in the morning. That was a mistake. Taking that. Um, that was Lynn Rag, John. I took that in. That's Lynn Rag. Um, but yeah, I mean, a guy who obviously won Rookie of the Year as well. I don't think that's an accolade I said that did, but he did win the 79-80 Rookie of the Year.
Which
Had
normally I don't think of Rookie of the Year as being like a major award, but when you're competing against Magic Johnson for it, that does boost the credibility of it.
yeah, it doesn't hurt. I mean, had 4 seasons where he finished second in the MVP voting, so like could have more. Um, got finished third in Defensive Player of the Year voting in 82-83. A lot of NBA first teams, like we mentioned. I mean, I think it's a coin flip, and I don't know. Honestly, it's like I said, the trash and just in general, for whatever reason, like whenever I think of like watching Larry Bird highlights or whatever, like I feel like I'm watching Larry Bird, whereas like if it's Magic Johnson highlights, I'm watching the Showtime Lakers featuring Magic Johnson. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah, I
not to
think
say
that's
that Magic
fair.
isn't great. Like
Yeah.
um,
Well, I mean, we did draft another player from the Showtime Lakers already drafted, so like
this is
it does
true.
speak to how much he wasn't.
But again, not to talk like Larry Bird wasn't playing with nobodies on Boston either.
Oh yeah.
But um, and
So
let's
I
be
was
honest,
thinking about the. I was
I
thinking
gotta
about the two
ask
of
you,
these guys.
what's the better nickname? Is it Magic or is it the Hick from French Lick?
So I think I have to go with Magic just because it's like became his name basically. Like it's hard for me to kind of top that, and the fact that he was so like they were willing to just call him Magic, and like obviously like the Hick from French Lick is a little bit more like creative, I guess, but
Can you imagine how nerdy they could have been with Irvin Johnson and Lou Alcindor?
yeah. I mean
Nerd
there
time.
was Do you remember the center Irvin Johnson that played in like I want to say like the late '90s, early 2000s? It
I
was
I do
Ervin.
remember
I bet that guy's very glad that the other guy went by Magic.
that, probably.
Yeah, so I will say that one argument I think that's compelling for Bird over Magic would be I think that if they had switched teams, I think that Larry Bird on the Lakers would have been a more interesting proposition maybe than Magic on the Celtics because the Celtics had other good players, but they didn't have anybody that scored at the volume of Larry Bird. Whereas the Lakers did have like a pretty good point guard in Norm Nixon whenever Magic got drafted. And I think that if you put Norm Nixon kind of, running the show with, Larry Bird, Kareem, James Worthy eventually,
Like
Jamal
James
Wilkes,
Worthy was
I
like the
think
sixth man, wasn't he? Like,
he was like the guy. He was a number one overall draft pick. Who's just like base. Who was like never better than like the third best player on the team.
yeah, but still really
It's like
good. Like,
a silly amount of depth. But ultimately, though, actually would give the slight edge to Magic over Larry, and I'm going to take Magic with the
yeah,
next pick on the list. I can't say that I'm like passionate about Magic versus Larry, but I think that just sort of the sheer like Magic Johnson just kind of like reinventing the game kind of nature of like what a high volume assist guy he was, but also just like physically just enormous. The fact that you have the 6'9" guy playing point guard, there just like hasn't really been anything like it. And if you think of a guy who's like a your point guard now, unless you're thinking of like, you know, talk about like whenever LeBron kind of functionally plays the point, or like Scottie Pippen, but in terms of like true point guards, it's still basically one of one. Like all due respect to like the 6'5" guys or whatever, but
yeah,
and like there's a reason that like Magic, whenever he came back in like the mid '90s to play, just like, oh, we're gonna put this guy at power forward. Like he's not fast enough to play point guard anymore, but like he's so big and just
yeah.
a true kind of extremely like otherworldly talent. He was a 9-time first team All NBA, won 3 MVPs. Looking through his stat, had a couple steal titles in there, which is I think interesting.
Yeah.
He never got a all defense, but he had the couple. As far as I can tell, was generally accepted to be a good defensive player, if not an elite defensive player. But somebody who was so versatile and famously whenever Kareem got hurt during his rookie season played center during the finals, and like the fact that you would move from, and I guess Magic was kind of more of a two guard at that point because of Norm Nixon, but like the fact that you could go from like basically running the show offensively to like playing center and still being really good at it, like he's up there in terms of just like pure like how is this guy doing this kind of sensation? And like I remember whenever LeBron was coming out of high school, like people would compare him to Jordan just because that's like the fresh and obvious comp, but people who were a little bit more nuanced, I think, were comparing him to Magic Johnson just because they were like, this guy is just physically can do things that like you can't even imagine. And similar to with Larry, like it makes perfect sense to me that Magic Johnson and Larry Bird, like once they got to know each other, were very friendly and had kind of a fun rivalry, but were very cordial and got along great because they're just both like super competitive, but also just like super fun of people.
Oh yeah.
And
And
I
both
think it is
teams.
one of those things where like you really can't go like if you were a Lakers or a Celtics fan, which obviously I wasn't paying attention to basketball in the '80s, but like any good American, I root against both of those teams pretty regularly.
Right.
But yes, like you couldn't go wrong with either side, and like obviously like the racial component of like Larry Bird, being this white guy from Indiana versus Magic Johnson, who I mean was from Michigan. It's not like he was from like a dramatically different part of the country, but you know, and people kind
Detroit
of
is
drawing
right.
conclusions of like
Or is he
people
Or
be
was
like,
he
oh well, he was from
Sorry.
Lansing, I believe, but yeah, I think that as much as Larry Bird was associated as like the blue collar guy and Magic was associated as like the flashy guy, like both of those guys had plenty of the other's bag as well.
Yeah, 100%. It's like, and like you see even like how their posts, both of them have become very successful like after their playing careers as well. Like obviously Bird was in the front office for a long time in Indiana and stuff. I mean, Magic Johnson now is like part owner in like I don't know 75 sports franchises or whatever he's you know owns now. I mean,
I'd forgotten that he was a part owner of the Commanders until last week, whenever he was tweeting about the NFC Championship game. It's like, oh yeah, that's interesting.
yeah, they came close.
I will always find Larry Bird's coaching career fascinating because he was basically like, I'm only going to coach for a couple years. I'm not going to keep doing this. He was immediately great at it. He had the Pacers nearly beating Michael Jordan's Bulls in '98, and then he was true to his word. He's like, no, like I said, I'm here for a couple years. I'm done, and then he never came back.
You got to. I mean, and not to mention,
And
he
he's
has like one of the greatest commercials of all time, the horse commercial with Michael Jordan and Larry Bird.
oh yeah,
And in the movie Space Jam,
that is true.
Larry's not white, Larry's clear, as Bill Murray said to Michael Jordan in that movie.
Yeah, I mean, not wrong, I guess.
it's funny because I think he's talking about playing basketball. He's like, "Hey, Mike, you think I can play?" He's like, ah. He's like, "It's because I'm white, isn't it?" Larry's white.
Yeah,
Larry's not white. Larry's clear.
yeah. Larry's also conservatively one of the 10 greatest basketball players ever, so maybe a little bit of a difference between.
Bill Murray, one of the 10 best comedic actors of all time, perhaps. I didn't think
Yeah,
about that one.
probably.
He's up there.
Yeah, I don't really have a list going, but yeah, it makes sense.
Yeah. Depends if you're gonna throw guys like Charlie Chaplin and Buster Keaton, how high you want to put them up on the list. I feel like. Or,
Let's not give away potential draft day content down the
hey,
road.
yeah. Dude, don't get me started. You know I'm a Chaplin guy. I go through random phases where I'll text you and just be like, dude, I'm watching Charlie Chaplin movies, and if you're in the mood for them, they're fantastic. This is all stall tactic because this is where I'm like, what do I want to do at 8? And I guess I'm gonna stick or go back into the well of big men. I know there's gonna be two, but I mean, when I just think about like we're talking about heights of heights here, like you kind of did with Jordan at his heights, like at his peak, I don't know that I've ever seen in my lifetime a more dominant player than Shaquille O'Neal. Like, honestly.
Yeah, he is a fascinating player because I remember not liking the Lakers and just being like, guys are just scared of him. They're just like running away from him, not quite understanding that like the reason they were running away from him is because he was gonna like draw fouls, and while he wasn't a great free throw shooter, that was still a negative.
Until old buddy in Minnesota, it was like, all right, guys, hack a Shaq, here we go. Like when you become that big of a part of the game plan, we're like, hey, if he gets the ball, just foul him immediately.
Yeah,
Like, it's he's always talked about. I mean, he only has one MVP, but has 3 Finals MVPs and 4
yeah,
total
he
titles.
was. Yeah, like I was saying before, when we were talking about, whenever you talking about Kobe, like it drives me nuts when people like point out the 5 Kobe titles as though like, oh, that's one less than Jordan. It's like, yeah, but Shaquille O'Neal was his teammate for 3 of them.
Yeah, like the last one especially, yeah, you could put that one squarely on Kobe's shoulders, I think. Like his fifth title.
I mean, it's mostly on Kobe, but like Pau Gasol was a Hall of Famer. Like he was a good
Well, yeah.
player.
Well, yeah, but that's like saying, it's like obviously Jordan, but like Pippen, same sort of deal. I mean,
Yeah,
you know,
I'm willing to give Kobe credit for the last two titles more so than I am giving Pau Gasol credit. I'm just saying that like every once in a while I'll see like a meme where it's like, look at these bunch of bums that Kobe kicked, dragged kicking and screaming to a title. It's like, well, no, Pau Gasol was really good. Like
like
Andrew Bynum didn't have a long peak, but he was really good for those couple of years.
a couple of years before he got the whatever that haircut was. But like,
Yeah,
I mean, yeah, you could do that thought. Like those Laker teams, though. I mean, it's like, you still had guys like, I mean, Robert Ory, Big Shot Bob,
oh sure, yeah,
you know, um,
Rick Fox in there.
yeah, Rick Fox. Hey, Rick Fox, he gets all the credit in the world, and it's not for what he did on the court. Um, Big ups for his off the court game.
Sure.
Um, but or Derek Fisher. I mean, like,
Yeah.
I can think of a
Shout out
shot.
to greatest Kareem in Lakers history, Kareem Rush.
Hey, he hit 6 threes in a playoff game for him.
Did he really?
Yeah,
I don't remember that at all. Wow,
I'll send you the video when we're off here. I
that's
go
so
back and
cool.
watch it every so often. It makes me just smile.
Okay, yeah, I gotta check that out.
But I mean, like a dude who, you know, he just so different than like what I was doing, and like maybe part of this is nostalgia because like I remember being a kid, and like now that I'm an adult and I know better, I don't root for the Lakers. But when I was a kid, I would come home from church on Sunday, and like my dad wasn't a huge like basketball fan in the early 2000s and stuff. He watched it growing up in the 60s, 70s, some of the 80s. But I would go into my parents' room where they had their TV, and I'd turn on NBC, and like during that time, like 8 out of 10 games had the Lakers on. Like you know,
Oh yeah, like even
they
when
were
the
the
Lakers
draw.
aren't good, they dominate in terms of TV draws.
Yeah, and I mean, and it doesn't hurt when you get pumped up by the greatest sports, theme song of all time. Shout out to John Tesh. Um, and then you go into like what that would have been like Marv Albert doing the calls, I think.
Yeah,
So I mean, like as a kid who like like I started watching this on my own. Like to me, it felt like a cool thing because it's like, oh, I got my time now. It's like a 10-year-old kid. I was like every other second pretending to do like slam dunks and jumping on my parents' bed and probably getting yelled at. But that was
deservedly.
something I just did on Sundays, and I have just very distinct memories of kind of the Kings rivalry with the Lakers through that time. Like so sad because
And
those Kings teams were so good.
I loved those Kings teams. I thought they were so much fun.
Like I got so excited when earlier this year when Mizzou played Cal and Peja Stojakovic's kid is on Cal because boy did I love me some Peja Stojakovic.
There was a period where I was convinced that Mike Bibby was like a top three player in the NBA. I was wrong, obviously, but like I was convinced he was just like the perfect point guard.
I mean, wasn't a bad point guard.
Well, he was good, but yeah, probably
I mean,
not quite as high up as
there's
I.
like what I mean, what like I feel like was the starting five that it was Bibby, Stojakovic, Doug Christie, Divac, and Weber, right? Like that was their
Yep.
starting five. Like that's a really good starting five.
Yes, it is.
And yet they had to face Kobe and Shaq.
Yes.
And but I mean Shaq just physical specimen. I mean, like when you can have your own compilation of you just like breaking hoops in an NBA game,
Yeah.
or oh gosh, who was it? Who was the Knicks guy that he dunked on and shoved to the floor? Um,
Um,
big white guy. Um,
I can picture what you're talking about. I can't think of who it is though.
yeah, it's just all sorts of random things, and obviously the impact he's had. As like a pundit now outside of. I mean, I respect the fact that the man will be in a commercial for anything if you pay him enough money. Um,
He's also the highest ranked player on this list that has ever shouted out a former draft day special guest on a TNT broadcast. So he's got that going for him.
I mean,
I haven't watched the Shaquille O'Neal. I'm not worried about P Funk video in a while. I gotta pull that one up.
yeah. Oh my goodness, I forgot. I ain't worried about. That's right, because he put something that got put on like inside the NBA or whatever, right? Like or the TNT
Yeah,
broadcast.
because he was making fun of the way that Shaquille O'Neal was mispronouncing Rui Hachimura's name, which for all I know, I'm not pronouncing it exactly right, but I'm also not paid for this, so
Still not
not as
convinced that he
worried.
knows how to say Giannis's last name. So
There's a reason that they just
guess
let
what?
people just
He's
say
Shaq,
Giannis.
and he doesn't really need to.
Yeah, he's there for
So
vibes, and he's a good vibes guy.
yeah. Well, and to be fair, like genuinely seems like a good dude. The kind of guy like you see stuff all the time. He's like he sees a single mom at Walmart with her kid. He's like, "Hey, I'm gonna buy him something. I'll pick up your groceries, whatever you're buying."
Yeah,
Like a kid who you know, or a kid, a guy who just obviously when he was a kid, kind of his stepdad, I think, or became his father, was really kind of helped shape some of his stuff. But he had the single mom before that, and everything, and it's you know now he just, I mean, he's Shaq. I mean, you see him, and you're just like, oh, I really shouldn't care about this general insurance. That, let's be honest, it seems kind of sketchy. But Shaq's in the commercial, so
yeah.
oh, Shaq's in
Obviously,
Papa
he has
John's
credibility.
commercial. I don't have to think about the guy that Papa John's is named after and what he did.
It's
Uh,
Shaq-a-roni.
dude, like I know for obvious reasons you probably never partaked in a Shaq-a-roni. It's a solid
I
pizza,
have
man.
not.
It is a solid pizza.
I'd say it's some of the most appetizing looking fast food pepperoni I've ever seen in my life.
Like, oh, dude, it's Papa John's sneaky with that, and Papa John's best stuffed crust in the chain pizza game. Just
I agree
throwing
with
that.
that.
But yeah,
All right,
give
so
me give me Big Shaq at number 8.
we've got our top 8. I'm gonna say let's go one more round each, just to get a solid top 10. For my next pick, I am going to stick in the realm of big men of a certain era. This is a little bit more of a power forward than a center, but I go with Tim Duncan. Tim Duncan is,
Fundamental.
was like honestly a guy who was like called underrated so long that I think he's like now properly rated as an unbelievable basketball player. 10-time first team All NBA. Um, was kind of the linchpin of those Spurs teams. By the last title, you could argue that maybe Kawhi Leonard had kind of surpassed him as like the like alpha on the team, but this is a guy who played 4 years of college, which is just wild to think about, and was first team All NBA his rookie year. Just like basically hit the ground running and did not stop for many years, and was just somebody who 3-time MVP, but received MVP votes. I want to say, I'm going to make sure I don't get this wrong. Oh, okay, sorry. He was a 2-time MVP, but he received MVP votes in 16 different seasons. And
Yeah.
that just speaks to like he was always in the conversation. Like he was always a guy. He was a guy basically from like 1997 through 2014. You would regard as being if not the best player in the NBA, like certainly in the top 10, usually in the top 5. And, he was, not only such a great player for those Spurs teams, but also was really just kind of like the identity of those teams. And like the fact that they were able to get David Robinson, who, you know, probably isn't going to come up on this episode, but it'll probably come up on the next episode we do because he's way up there.
Good.
But like, you go from a guy like that to getting a guy who, similarly is a very like stoic, very, kind of just does everything like the right way kind of guy. And to move on to it being Tim Duncan, that, the Spurs basically got, 25 years basically of at least one of those two guys being, at kind of the center of their plans. And the fact that they then got Victor Wembanyama is just so unfair. It's kind of,
It
like they basically got like, hey, you know how these Spurs teams were being carried by a generational first overall big man and a guy from France? We're just gonna merge these two things together, come up with one guy. It's gonna be completely sick. Now the Spurs might be getting De'Aaron Fox soon, so we'll see how that works out. But
Sacramento's like, oh yeah, we're gonna trade him now. I'm like, what? That's yeah. I mean, Tim Duncan. I feel like he was a guy who was always like people said he was underrated just because he was fairly quiet. Like,
yeah, it really was like a he was quiet kind of thing. And I remember there was like this weird like period of like very early 2000s ESPN discourse have been like, is Duncan like, is he marketable enough? Is he cool enough? Like they were coming up with like a shoe line and like, I can't, it might have been Max Kellerman who said this, but like, somebody was like, yeah, people are like, oh, well, is he as cool as Michael Jordan? It's like, you know what Michael Jordan did? He won and he was really good at basketball. And Tim Duncan has that going. And, granted, Tim Duncan was not as, charismatic, especially off the court as, Shaquille O'Neal was,
yeah,
but somebody who, and honestly, I always enjoyed watching him play. Like, he didn't
I mean,
have, like, he wasn't tearing down backboards like Shaq, but, like, always was, like, it is fun to just watch a guy just kind of dominate in the low post, and that's what he did.
yeah. I mean, he was a guy like my one of my favorite things about Duncan was like he didn't have to be loud and boisterous on the court. All he had to do was like make his eyes wide, and you're like, oh crud, like Timmy's pissed. Like
Yeah.
because it seems like anytime he'd do it, like the cameraman would always like zoom in on his face. You would just see like Tim Duncan, like, and you're like, uh oh, feed Timmy the ball, and good things are going to happen. And the other thing is frankly, given who his coach was, he didn't have to be the loud one because he had a coach who's like going to
Who
be
do the
up at
talking
all
for him, yeah.
pieces. It's I don't feel. Do you imagine? I mean, and I think he did like an Olympics with like like Shaq, a young Shaq trying to play with Pop or something. Like, and I
Yeah.
think it was something that I remember a story with Shaq. Like his stepdad like reamed him one time because he kind of like shoot off Pop one time when he was trying to tell him something, and he's like, "That's a military man. Don't you ever do that to him again." Kind of a thing. His Shaq stepdad was a military guy, but yeah, I mean Timmy, like he was the guy that I always like. I gravitated to him this first because, like, I mean, for me, it was like while Kobe and Shaq were like the big fly, high flying, talented, flashier duos, like, but like Tim Duncan and when David Robinson was there, like that was just like to me it's like those are just like two like they were just two men like down there like
Yeah.
and I
And they were
really would
guys
love
who
to meet
just
the
like,
people in his rookie year who there were three people who voted for Keith Van Horn to be rookie of the year over Tim Duncan, and I would like to meet them.
that seems like the, look, all
Is
due
that just
respect to Keith Van
racism? Like,
Horn. Look, Keith Van Horn had his moments. I'm not trying to degrade the guy, but come on. Come
yeah.
on.
Well, I mean, it's like the one guy who didn't vote Ichiro in. Like, and there's always a guy.
That is so much more defensible than not voting for Tim Duncan for Rookie of the Year.
Okay. I mean, slightly smaller implications as well, but yeah.
Yeah.
I was looking that up and I was like,
Yeah.
I wonder who he was up against that year. And I'm like, the only other guy to receive votes was Keith Van, who got 3 out of 117.
Yeah. Well, because the two other guys from that draft that are like kind of like Hall of Fame or Hall of Fame adjacent players are Tracy McGrady, who was straight out of high school, so he
High
was
school.
not fully formed, and Chauncey Billups, who like got traded in the middle of his rookie year. All
Yeah,
right, you
it's
are up at number 10.
all right. What kind of note do we want to go out on? Ah, shoot, who cares? Nothing drafting. It's like I took Shaq. I'll take Kobe at 10. Like,
He was the next guy up on my list, so that's the right call.
yeah, I mean, I think Kobe's a guy who I think just based on what he did and just kind of his personality, like if there is ever a great NBA player who literally worked their way into being a great NBA player, if not just necessarily having like next level physicality or the highest of God given talents, it might be him. Not to say that he wasn't a talented player, but you hear all
Yeah.
the stories of his work ethic, seeing like him like defensively. Like I didn't realize how many all defensive teams he has. He has 9 first team all
Oh
defensive
yeah.
teams.
Yeah. I mean,
Like
the cliche about Kobe is that he's basically just like kind of Michael Jordan Jr.
yeah.
Which I mean, Jordan went earlier in this draft, but like being a lesser version of Michael Jordan is still really good.
Yeah, I mean that's a guy who, like something that like 16th in steals all time, Kobe. Um 5 titles, like we've talked about numerous times, 2 finals MVPs, 1 MVP, um 11 first team selections, 18 all-stars, 9 defensive first teams, and a couple of gold medals on his shelf. And he was an active role in both those as well.
Yeah, and especially on the 2008 team, he was like kind of like the center of gravity around that team. Like if you watch the Netflix documentary about the Redeem team, it becomes very clear that like while there were so many great players on that team, including a guy that we drafted earlier than him is drafted with LeBron, but like Kobe in that moment in time was the guy.
Yeah, he was, and just has he was the guy that like if you were around Kobe, from everything you hear, obviously, but between the team documentary, just other stories you hear, it's like if Kobe was in your face or talking, like you were listening to him, like the way Jordan got to be, like or to hear like guys who be like, oh yeah, I was going to the gym, I shoot with Kobe, and then like he had already been there for an hour, but like we shot for 2 hours and I had to leave, and like Kobe was like, all right, I'm gonna get up a few more shots because I'm not gonna lose to you, and just like putting up shots, like it's not gonna be said that I didn't work as hard as you, or
Yeah, just
you
an
know,
absolutely like for a guy whose dad was an NBA player, like somebody who just like really comes across as being like just the most like insanely competitive person imaginable, really.
yeah, it you know sort of crazy. I mean, obviously, I think it's you know he'll always be talked about. I think with a little different light, given how his life came to an end, short, early in the tragic
Yeah.
way that it did. Because I think it's an interesting thing that it may make us like rate him higher, like because I think there's as we get into next players, like there are players on my list, like I had Kobe up here, but you could make arguments that players that will be drafted next time are better players than Kobe, but I don't know that there's a better competitor, if that is an
Yeah.
intangible
Let's put it this
piece
way.
of.
There aren't really any other players on the board, I think, that like you ever hear anyone make greatest like the greatest of all time kind of arguments for.
Yeah.
People will do that with Kobe, and I disagree with them. I think that he's probably like the worst player who's thrown into that category.
Yeah.
But
Kind of
I
our
mean, I
top
kind of get
three,
why
and
though.
then him
Because
are kind of the four. I feel like that get arguments.
well, he's also just like an extremely popular player on an extremely popular team who spent his entire career there, and he was with the Lakers for 20 years.
Yeah.
And so, like, yeah, he's gonna there's gonna be a lot of affection for him. And I remember the day that he died, the Grammy Awards were that night at Staples Center, and people were talking about like, should we like postpone this? Like, it feels weird that like even though obviously he had no like real connection to the Grammys, but like he had a connection to that building and just the idea of this is like he's a culturally significant figure. Looking at guys,
And the
there were
award
not
winning.
that many guys. That's true. Looking at the guys on this list, I think there's maybe four other guys, I guess, who have been drafted that were one team guys, which I
Bird
mean, we have two
was,
guys who were
Russell was.
Russell, yeah, a couple lifelong Celtics, and then lifelong Spur and Duncan, lifelong Laker and Magic. But I feel like even more than Magic, Kobe became like kind of like this like provincial hero, probably because like by the time Magic got to LA, he was already a star. You know, he was the number one overall pick. He was the champion in college basketball. And Kobe was like a late lottery pick who, kind of was like nondescript coming to the league. And, he really just kind of grew up there. And, obviously, I don't want to, be glib about kind of like the issues in his personal life that, are kind of impossible to not think about when thinking of his legacy. But like, that becomes part of the story, and like all of that stuff just kind of happens to a point where like people get very like protective of like their guy because they see Kobe like almost as like their brother or their son, or depending on how old you are.
Yeah, I mean, and I think Kobe, a guy who, at least what I can remember, back when uh, it seemed like, at least in my areas, like people were wearing basketball jerseys a lot more as like just fashion, in that time. Like, I don't know that you saw a person's jersey more than you saw Kobe's.
Yeah,
Like
I,
maybe
I
some
think
old
he was.
Jordans you saw a lot of. But
Yeah, like I think that he was the easier player too. I like, and it seems like almost a dumb way of putting it, but just like he looks more like a normal person than Shaquille O'Neal does. Like Shaquille O'Neal's a 7'1", 300 pound guy. He's like looks like a monster. Whereas like he's 6'6". He's tall for sure, but
yeah,
a little bit different.
I think it's just one of those where, like, yeah, I think throwing him into the greatest of all time debate, like you said, I find it to be like, like Kobe's not there. I think people do it just because, like, in terms of like, as a kid, like I said, obviously watching him and stuff, like when I was in the driveway playing, I mean, like, I wasn't pretending to be Tim Duncan or Shaq as a little 5 foot, you know, kid or whatever I was then. I was Kobe doing things, flying through the air, shooting jump shots. Like, now kids are Steph Curry and they're pulling up from the street to shoot at their
Yeah,
driveway hoops and stuff. And, it's like, it's interesting because, like, Steph Curry is the one basketball player that my son can name. And it is purely because he was tickled to death by the night celebration that he gave against France when he hit that last ridiculous crossover step back three.
oh yeah,
And now that is how my son learned who Steph Curry was.
yeah. I have a feeling Steph Curry may be coming up in future
Yeah,
editions.
I think this is going to be an interesting thing now that because if I'm right, what all these guys, LeBron's the only active one, right? I think once you get
Yes.
outside the top 10, it gets interesting of where do we start to rank some current players in terms of the
Yeah.
ranking.
Yeah, I have some current guys. There will be some current guys coming up, even if we just go 10 more next time. But now that we
Yeah,
have the premise, we might be able to go a
I
little
mean,
quicker.
let's
But
just say that I would venture to guess we either get the best player or someone else maybe soon. Perhaps
the reference to Al Horford, I believe.
Greg Oden is actually who we were going for there.
It's rough. Okay.
But no, I think like I don't know, and I think I had 9 of these guys in my top 10 that we took. So it's like okay, like I think is the deviation will start to separate itself, but then it'll be a you know I think this will be a fun series going forward. But I think
Yeah, I think so
if you want,
too.
I can recap who we kind of did for the
Yeah, let's lay
drafts.
the top 10 out there.
And so I'll just go in order just so we kind of have the top 10 itself versus necessarily who picked
Yep,
who.
I
Um,
agree.
Number 1, Michael Jordan. Number 2, LeBron James. Number 3, Kareem. Number 4, Bill Russell. Number 5, Wilt Chamberlain. Number 6, Larry Bird. Number 7, Magic Johnson. Number 8, Shaquille O'Neal. Number 9, Tim Duncan. And number 10, Kobe Bryant. Uh, I think
No
it's an
major
interesting.
qualms there.
No, I mean it's like even if it's like saying like I don't know like because even like I'm not in terms of some things like I'll even be critical of like my own Shaq pick here, saying Shaq's a top 10 player. It's mostly because of the dominance at peak. If that dude would
Well, I
have
get
like
it. Like,
if that dude would have like applied himself and like taken things real serious, like are we talking a top 5 player of all time in Shaq?
could be. Yeah. I mean,
You know,
Shaq was the one guy that we drafted that was not in my personal top 10, but one, he was like, I think 13th, so it was like not that
yeah,
far off, but
I had
also like
Duncan at
was
12,
such
so
a dominant figure that I totally get the argument for him.
yeah, I had Duncan at 12, and it was hair splitting. So it's
Sure.
like nothing insane, and like I think we're gonna start to see maybe more. You start to get more preference because this next round of guys I think will could be in the same ballpark. Uh, It was funny. I don't know if you looked at any like lists or if you just did purely stats. Like I looked at lists to kind of get an idea on some of these things, and some of these lists that like people put out there, I'm like, really? Like I looked at one list that had James Harden as the 6th best player of all time.
Okay, come on.
Yeah,
Let's
and I'm just
that's
like,
yeah.
don't get me wrong, man. James
Yeah,
Harden's a
good
good player.
player. And
Like you could, but come on, and
he
it's
was
a hard
on
thing
the
because
whenever I ranked my top 75 players, he was on there. But like, let's settle down.
yeah. I mean, how high is Wembanyama going to go next time?
This is a fluid list. It's possible he does something in the next couple weeks that just on up.
Yeah, it's. I mean, there's a lot of things like this would be so like if you even just think like, and maybe this is a discussion I have on an episode later, but like think about like who are the NBA guy, like who are the players now who are most likely to, like make it into maybe the top 25 all time that are currently playing, you know,
I
or
mean,
are
I have
there
quite
more
a
that
few.
are there already? Like, I mean,
LeBron's not my only active player in my top 25.
no, nor is he mine.
Or
It's more of like, I mean, Wembanyama may be the easy answer because it's sample size. Luca maybe,
for guys that aren't there yet, you mean?
yeah. Luka Doncic
Yeah.
probably,
Yeah.
those types of guys. But yeah, no, he's definitely not the only. Yeah, well, I've alluded to I think 2 in this outro a little bit of that I think will come up that are definitely in my top 25.
Right, and
But yeah,
we will have those ready for the next time we do one of these, which might be next episode, might be a future episode. I don't know, but
yeah.
it'll be on the
Hopefully we have
feed.
another
It'll
episode
be
up before a month and a half from now.
yeah, it'll be on the next episode of Draft Day, or it'll be on a future episode of Draft Day, which you could find wherever you found this episode. You can find us on Apple Podcasts, on Spotify, or wherever. Jason, where can people find you specifically?
I mean, you can find me at my house, but if you know where that is, that's kind of creepy. But
I know
you
where your
can
house
find
is.
me on Twitter at DraftDayDadShaw um, for my like one tweet a week. It's usually getting mad about Mizzou basketball for something small and
Yeah,
stupid.
that's what I found the case for the most part for your tweets.
Yeah, it's I don't know. I've put out. I've just realized that I'm not interesting enough and don't have the time to dedicate to social media with two young kids. Um, but if I do, it's going to end up me just like tweeting about wrestling more and more. Because as we're recording this, the Royal Rumble is this Saturday, so my favorite event of the
Nice.
year. Son and I are pretty excited, looking forward to it. John, where can people find you on all the
You
social?
can find me on Twitter and Blue Sky, both JohnJF125. You can check out stlbullpen.com where I wrote my first article in like a month and a half today, which may come across as laziness, but also may come across as the Cardinals haven't done anything this offseason.
I'm gonna say
So nothing to write
your
about.
writing is reflective of what this team has done.
Yeah, the entire article is basically saying like, are they going to do anything? The answer is I
Yeah,
don't know, but
it's like I think I saw something recently from a mutual friend of ours, Brendan Schaefer, about like, so are the Cardinals really committed to this rebuild, or like what's going on?
I think they might just be lazy.
Wow,
I think they might just be like
what
rebuilding is
incentive does
hard.
Jose Locke have to do anything? He's just coasting this last year.
Yeah, it's basically the last couple months of buying all over again. He's just like, whatever, time's ticking. I'm just gonna stop caring.
Gosh, does that mean the first weeks of I'm blanking on new guy's name are going to be like the last
Ryan
few
Bloom,
weeks we've
yeah.
had?
Uh, they'll probably be more
Anyway,
interesting. Better or worse, I don't know, but they'll be more interesting. I will give them that.
all right, that's fair enough.
That's a good note to go out on.
Yeah. So yeah, have fun y'all and thanks for listening. We'll see you next time.
All right, bye everybody.